We're nearly at 7 o'clock. So Wendy, I'm going to leave it to you to say whether you want to wait a little extra, a little longer, or whether you want to start dead on 7 o'clock.
I've started recording. It's up to you, Joan. You're in control.
Brilliant. We will start at 7 because people can obviously log in when they want. We've got a number of speakers and we've also got limited time. We've just got an hour and a half and we've got 8 speakers. And what we have agreed is that each speaker will have 5 minutes, and after each speaker we will leave time for 5 minutes of questions. So if you've got a question that's pertinent to that particular speaker, of course you can address it, but we're hoping that we will have time for general debate, discussion and general questions at the end as well. So you will be muted while each speaker is putting forward their ideas, their suggestions and points, but you will have the opportunity directly after them to put forward your questions. Feel free to use the chat function as well. It's always really useful when we see the contributions that people make in chat. So far we have got about 28 people at this first launch rally for the East Anglian People Before Profit. And for a Friday evening, as I said earlier, I think that's really good going. And it shows the amount of anger, concern, annoyance in East Anglia about how this government are dealing abysmally, chaotically with the COVID pandemic. They were ill prepared and they have definitely put profit ahead of people. And now alongside COVID, we've got an even, a situation that's going to exacerbate the job losses and the insecurity and more austerity, because it looks like we are going to be exiting the European Union with no deal. And it's another example of how poorly prepared this government is to look after the things that matter to the ordinary working people. People Before Profit were set up to counter this type of rhetoric, to do something about it. But they're not, People Before Profit are not there to take the place of other organisations which are up and running. And much like other organisations, we want to work closely with our trade union comrades. And I'm proud to use the term comrades. I don't shy away from it. I don't shy away from the term brother or sister. And I see no need to use colleagues instead of comrades. There's a lot that joins us together, and we mustn't be afraid to use the language that was embedded and brought to life by the trade unions. I'm really proud to announce that our first speaker is Jane Loftus. She joined the post office in January 1982 in Liverpool, and she's been an active member and a trade union rep since 1983, and that takes some going. Obviously, with this length of experience, Jane's got lots of experience of industrial disputes, mergers and policy making at all levels. But what's important for many of us when we're fighting for equality is the fact that Jane is a female trade unionist, and she holds a position which we need to see more of, so that women can be represented, can see representation at these high levels and think, yeah, this is the type of thing that I can go for. People Before Profit have got an emergency programme for jobs, services and safety. And the first demand is to extend the furlough scheme, defend jobs, and say the government's furlough schemes must be kept in place for at least the next 12 months. No worker should be left behind. We will support any group of workers that takes legal industrial action to defend their jobs. And it's perfectly timed, because the BT members of the CWU have voted decisively, 97.9%, to take industrial action because of BT's vicious action in their programme of compulsory redundancy, site closures and attacks on pay terms and conditions. So, Jane, start off our opening rally for People Before Profit discussing what she wants, really, but it leads nicely into the first demand. Thank you, Jane.
Okay, thanks, Jo. Thanks for those kind words. I do feel like it's been around forever, but like many people, we never seem to learn the lessons of being here for so long. And I think COVID has exposed everything. It's exposed how economically what system we live under. But it's also exposed and put to the front what are the vital services we do need in terms of providing everyone with what they need. I was involved with the nurses during their time in their COVID groups organising around that. And I found it very inspirational to be involved in People Before Profit. One, I just think it sums up totally what happens in society previously. But in terms of moving forward, trying to link all the campaigns that are happening and putting some structure to what we do want so that we are raising demands. Because probably like yourselves, I could sit here for hours and talk about how it's been. But we know employers, big businesses are exploiting the situation. Also, politicians, to me, have failed in providing for ordinary workers. Yes, they've put some things in place, but never been good enough. And also have never answered the issue that we need to know, what does the future look like? And at this point in time, you would think that we'd be able to be having that debate around climate change as well and carbon neutral. You know, as we see the economy sort of at a standstill, what does the future look like? And instead of that, I think they just see the same old, same old. And you've seen individuals, companies making massive amounts of money out of COVID. You see that we had a furlough scheme that they didn't want to extend, and they extended it for a month, and now they extended it till March. But in those little gaps, thousands of people lost furlough, and thousands of people are now in poverty. And that is the situation all across the country. So as well as dealing with the pandemic, we're dealing with people who literally cannot survive. And what we need to be doing is, obviously, where we've had campaigns, and there's been loads of them, and they are inspiring, from the students, Black Lives Matters. We're now starting to see a lot of unions starting to take industrial action, out on strike, because companies are closing them down, just moving it, knowing that full well at some point in the future you will need those workers back, but it enables them to bring you back on less money and to benefit them. So People Before Profit was set up to make sure that we had an emergency programme that make sure that the working class don't pay for the crisis with their lives and their livelihoods. We've had 10 years of austerity as well, and we know that's how come the health service was in such a bad state. And therefore, we know in the future what's going to happen. We're all going to be confronted with major cuts. Some of them will come from your councils. Your councils will not be able to get a budget this year or next year because they will have overspent. So there'll be cuts from your councils. We know, as in what is happening on Saturday, the likes of Debenhams, etc., will be protesting outside those stores on Saturday. Thousands of jobs come from there. You even have a debate about laying off transport workers, because at the moment people are told not to go on public transport. Yet we know public transport will be required in the future. So you would think, wouldn't it be better that we discussed what the infrastructure is? And that's no different for my union, the CWU. Quite interestingly, BT, being a privatised company since the 80s, it is a £1 billion industry. It is not in any form or shape having an issue or problems in terms of finances and making people compulsory redundant. Now, we've had to build up a campaign in that sector because these are mainly engineers. You don't have a workplace. You get your roster first thing in the morning and you go and do whatever engineering jobs you've got to do. And it was brilliant in the consultative ballot to get such a brilliant turnout, and also the percentage, nearly 98% people saying they wanted to take strike action and will move to a proper ballot if BT don't back off. So you can see a company in massive profit dealing with it. In Royal Mail, we're now a privatised company delivering the public services. And COVID has brought change that we knew was coming, but has brought it like 3 years earlier. So we're absolutely bursting at the seams at the moment with parcels. But if you look at what postal workers done during the first lockdown and continue to do now, we are more important now today than what we were before COVID, because people realise that we don't. If you go to need services, people need to deliver it. But also, we're the highest paid as what you would call parcel couriers. So we're constantly in a battle now in the privatised industry that we're paid too much, our conditions are too much. Now, I don't know about any of you, but fighting for safe workplaces, making sure you have the correct PPE has been a day in, day out battle with our employer, Royal Mail. And we're unionised and we have reps in every workplace. So what is happening in companies that aren't unionised, where people haven't got workplace reps and that? So you start to think, we may think we're badly off, but others will be doing worse than us. So we need to make sure that we're assisting with each other and joining arms, linking up together and showing solidarity. And I think people have done that in massive ways, whether that was support for the NHS. People were genuine when they clapped the nurses. They were genuine. And we should look at that and make sure that the health workers, care workers, etc., get a decent pay rise. We also need to make sure that where workplaces are taking strike action or going to strike action, that we link up with them. We all know our local communities and we all know how we can help each other in those local communities. And I believe People Before Profit is enabling that to happen where people live. And when you meet up on one subject, people are then interested in the other subjects and becoming active. So People Before Profit has a demand so that we can sort of organise together. But it is organic, as in it's how you organise in your local communities. But what we want to do is make sure that we're involved in food banks, raising money, making sure that we're showing solidarity, making sure that we're bringing forward equality and that we're united in our communities and racism isn't allowed to divide us, and making sure our unions are fit for purpose. There is no unions at the moment cannot afford to not listen to their workers. And their workers want defending and their workers need to fight to ensure we don't pay the price. So I would say to anyone, get involved, pass the motions at your union meetings, at your community meetings, whatever you do and sphere you work in or organise in. Let's join together, because one of the things that I am shocked about is how we haven't managed to rock the Tories. The students managed to do it. Unfortunately, the campaigns around nurses' pay haven't, and we need to make sure that we can rock the Tories and defend our class, because we cannot afford to pay the price for this COVID crisis when there is plenty of money. Sorry, that's been a bit long because there is so much to talk about, but that's the general flavour. Get involved, organise the unions in your community. Let's come together, stand together in whatever form we can do, physically or online. Let's show solidarity to each other. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jane. And I know how difficult it is to stick to a 5-minute speech. I've never been able to do it myself, so I feel a bit hypocritical trying to cut others off. Jane mentioned the motion that has been drawn up. And if you are a member of any organisation, we are asking that you take this motion to whatever organisation it is, whether it's your trade union branch meeting or a regional trade union meeting, the Labour Party, whatever, and pass this motion. Ask for this motion to be debated and pass it. Many of you are putting in the chat your contact details so that you can sign up to be kept informed of what's happening in the East Anglian People Before Profit. So please continue to do that. Before we go on to Krzysztof, does anyone have any questions that they would like to make directly to Jane, or in general about the first demand, which is about extending the furlough scheme and supporting workers that take legal industrial action to defend their job? So if you've got any questions, put your hand up. There is I believe, a hand raising function, which I should be able to see. And if you're putting your physical hand up, I'm probably not going to be able to see it. So that will be difficult. And if you don't have any questions, it's not a problem. We'll, as I said, have time for a more general debate afterwards. So last call out for any questions. Anthony has said that we should support all strikes. Absolutely. However, we know that in this country, we've got the most punitive industrial action, the most punitive strike laws, trade union laws going, and we have to jump through legal hoops in order for our workers not to risk losing their jobs if they don't take lawful industrial action. And this is one of the things that we can't countenance. People are already in fear of their jobs and less likely to take industrial action if they think they're going to face the sack. So we have to support them to go through the proper process, much like BT have already been through, so that they can take it legally. And that's what we have to work towards. And we have to make sure that we call it what it is, lawful industrial action. We have to use our terminology and stop allowing the right to dictate how things are referred to. Remember, we're the ones that support workers, not Tories, who have said, you know, in the last election, they were the party of the working people. We've seen how untrue that is. By the way, they wanted to hit Manchester with 2/3 of wages when they were going to lock down the city, yet as soon as it was a national lockdown, people were back up to 80% furlough. So we do have to use the right terminology. And when we're talking about trade unions and the solidarity that we have to show them, I'm really pleased to welcome Krzysztof as our next speaker. Krzysztof is a Unite member, and we know that Unite the Union have been incredibly vocal about a number of things, including what's taking place within the Labour Party for a long time. And I do think that Unite give many workers the confidence to believe that industrial action is something that they can take in their workplace, or at least ballot for it. And I do believe that Unite, along with other trade unions, give their workers the confidence to know that they're not going to suffer under employers that think they can act punitively, you know, capricious employers that don't bother to follow their own policies when it comes to consultation. So it's really good to hear from Krzysztof, a grassroots member, because that is what we need in every workplace. Somebody that's going to stand up for their colleagues and is going to say to the managers, to the bosses, no, you know, we're not going to have this. So Krzysztof, thank you. You've got 5 minutes, but as you've seen with Jane, I am a little bit liberal and will allow you to go over if you need. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I hope you hear me clearly. Thank you. So I decided to tell two stories. A story of my and my colleague. We both were dismissed from our jobs this spring, and I think this is related to the cost to the People Before Profit program. So I will start from a story of my colleague who was dismissed on 1st of June with 1 week notice, and although the situation in his company looks like the company was affected by the coronavirus pandemic, he wasn't put on a so-called furlough scheme, so job retention scheme, but he was just dismissed. And 3 weeks later, he got information through his friend that actually the employer is is asking him and maybe the other also employee who was dismissed with him. So there were 2 out of about 100 employees who were dismissed, as far as he knows, maybe more. but he decided to not come back to this workplace because he wasn't sure if after a couple of weeks later maybe he will be dismissed again. So he found another job on the end of the month and on not permanent conditions, just 0 hours job, but for last consecutive 5 months he has job for 40 hours per week. My story is that I was although I was dismissed with effect of end of June, I was on furlough for 2 months. Probably, if not my trade union regional rep was involved in the consultation meetings processes, I and the other 20 employees would be dismissed with the end of April, probably. So, and the employer didn't extend the furlough scheme, although it was for free for employer. Obviously, the furlough scheme is not for free for taxpayers, so a whole society need to contribute to that. But if many employers would do like my employer, we would have probably much more millions of unemployed people on the market looking for a job and claiming job seeker allowance. So I asked a direct question during the consultation process when I knew that me and other will be dismissed. What's the reason? Because the money is for free for the company. They just need to pass this 80% of our salaries through the scheme. Just filling, someone in the finance department needs to fill in documents and apply for money, and money will be flowing from the government to the company. And it happened for 2 months, but they decided to not extend it, although the cost is just like a man in finance should spend a couple of more, I don't know, hours, minutes or days just to filling in the forms and take care of the scheme. So, so I was told that yes, that's the only expense, but that was the overseas company with only 15% of the business being done in UK. The rest across the whole of the world. So, but about 50% of employees were employed in UK. So maybe they didn't want to harm mentally employees employed in different countries. I am not sure, and I am putting this testimony just to seeking for the answer, and maybe to prevent that situations happening to other people in the future. Thank you. So I think that's all. And thank you for inviting me tonight. And if there is if anyone of you have any questions, want to put some comment, please do it freely. Don't hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Krzysztof. And Krzysztof has highlighted there the benefits of being a member of a trade union, because without a trade union, you are standing alone in a workplace with employers that will act with impunity. I've seen it happen so many times. My daughter's friend is not a member of a trade union. And if it wasn't for her asking me for advice, he too would have been dismissed straight away. And we know that we've seen so many people fall through the cracks, those that were leaving one job and going on to another, for whom the furlough system wasn't available at all. But we know that the trade union movement has meant that so many people haven't faced instant dismissal, even though, as Krzysztof has quite rightly pointed out, it's costing the employer very, very little, national insurance payments only, in order for them to keep workers on. So it's nonsense to say that they shouldn't be, or they shouldn't be utilising the furlough system, and it doesn't make sense at all, really. Does anybody, any of the guest participants, have any questions that they would like to ask Krzysztof in general about maybe the action, how he got in touch with his trade union? Because this is one of the things that we do hear so often. Oh, well, the trade union didn't do this for me. But in matter of fact, if we don't inform or notify our trade union that we need help, they're not going to know. They're not mind readers. So if you've got any questions of what Krzysztof went through, then please let us know. Either raise your hand using the function, or pop it in the chat. That would be great. Ian has commented about the same thing that happened to him as a supply teacher through a supply teacher agency, even though 90% of his work for the last 3 years was with them. And that's one of the things that people will fall through the net. And we know the furlough scheme, however good it was trumpeted as being, left too many people high and dry, and so it really wasn't fit for purpose, and there was much more that the Conservatives could have done, but as we've already identified, they were in it for the profit and not the people. In the absence of any questions, I'm going to move directly on to Gawain Little, and we are privileged that Gawain has taken time out of his busy campaign. Gawain is not just an East Anglia People Before Profit supporter. He's a Norfolk Against Holiday Hunger activist. He is active in his trade union, the NEU, and actually Gawain is standing to be the Deputy Secretary, is that right, Gawain, of the NEU?
Yes, I'm standing as Deputy General Secretary.
Deputy General Secretary. So it's good to know that we're hopefully going to have the high and elevated amongst us, and supporting this campaign, you know, right from the outset. The second demand is a guarantee for safe workplaces. And this is one of the things that we have seen our school comrades suffer from a lack of. We know that schools are breeding grounds quite naturally for COVID contagion. It was different in the early days when there were far fewer students using schools. The schools were there to look after the children who were vulnerable, students who were vulnerable, and the key workers. I sort of have issues with them being used almost as a babysitting service, but unfortunately, because of the restriction on education, I think many teachers feel that they're not being able to teach in the way that they would like to. We've seen a gradual erosion of teaching and their freedom to properly educate. But that aside, schools haven't been the safest places to go, and we in Norfolk have campaigned for the closure of schools until they are safe. We all want students to be able to go to school, but not until them and the people that are supporting them in those schools can be safe. So it's quite apt that Gawain should come in when we're looking at the second demand, which is a guarantee for safe workplaces. So over to you. Thanks, Gawain.
Thanks very much, Joe, and thanks for the invitation to join the meeting this evening. I'm a local primary school teacher in Norwich, and throughout this crisis, that's meant that I've seen firsthand the situation as it is in schools, as well as through my union role, fighting to make our schools and our colleges safe, not just as workplaces, but also safe for our students, safe for their families, safe for their communities, because we all know the evidence is solid now. When you look at those figures, keeping schools and colleges open during that national lockdown was fueling the spread of the virus. And we need to be really clear about that, because this government has made wrong decision after wrong decision. In fact, this crisis has exposed what I believe are deep structural weaknesses that run throughout our system. We have a government that's totally failed to manage the pandemic, to keep our workplaces and our communities safe. They've abandoned our children's educational future. And just today, just this week, we've had the announcement that in spite of all the disruption, what will be continuing? Exams. They're not able to get the tests into workplaces to test for the virus and keep us safe, but they're still going to be testing our children rather than try and focus on their education and their learning. So they've totally abandoned our children's educational future, and they've stood by whilst working people have lost their jobs, lost the services they rely on, and in many cases lost their lives throughout this crisis. But, and I'm going to say something that I expect would prove controversial in this meeting, I don't believe that this government is wholly to blame for that. No, I'm not saying that to excuse them. Let me be really, really clear. This government is made up of what I believe are some of the most despicable human beings alive. And were there any justice, their criminal negligence during this crisis would not go unpunished. But I say they're not wholly to blame because the problem goes far deeper than the current government. It goes far deeper than which faces sit in number 10 in cabinet, etc. It's the whole system that's rotten. Years, decades of privatization, of marketization, of fragmentation and the hollowing out of the state have left our society unable to cope, not just with a crisis like this, but with the daily conditions of living. Think of the level of joblessness, of homelessness in our society. Can we really say that's acceptable at the best of times? And it's certainly not acceptable in a crisis like this. But of course, it will get worse. We've heard already that they plan to implement a 3-year public sector pay freeze. That will impact those very public sector workers who've risked their lives to keep the country going through this crisis. But it will also have a knock-on impact in the economy, restricting spending and costing jobs in the private sector. We should be really clear that public sector pay cuts mean private sector job cuts, because that's how an economy works. If you don't invest, it all comes crumbling down, as we've seen throughout austerity. But we're also likely coming out of this crisis to face mass unemployment and mass homelessness, because the government hasn't put any protections in place. And those companies that have failed, that are laying off workers left, right, and centre, are going to leave people without the income they need to survive. And ultimately, when they remove restrictions on evictions without anywhere to live, they will try to make working people pay for this crisis. So it's up to us to say, we will not pay for the crisis. It's not us that failed to implement a robust track and trace system. It's not us that failed to lock down and beat this crisis. It's not us that hasn't invested to protect people throughout the crisis. And we as working people should not pay for this government's failure or for the system's failure. So what do we need to do? I believe we need to unite our struggles, as Jane said earlier, link up every struggle of working people fighting against victimization, against layoffs, against being made to pay for this crisis. We need to organize our workplaces, organize our communities and bring them together. But we need to combine that with promoting a vision of an alternative, another world, a world in which we put people before profit.
Thank you, Gawain. That was a really powerful speech, and you're absolutely right. And it's one of the things that trade union members spend a lot of their time trying to do, organise their workplaces. And many of the people that are organising workplaces are also active in their communities. But I know there's too many communities that don't see the organisation that trade unions do as being relevant to them. They see it as far too political, yet we can see at this time that every action is political. Politics has a bearing on every single part of our lives. I have a friend whose husband supplies fruit and veg, and he has said before that the price of onions is political. You know, if the UK aren't doing a deal with Poland, then we're flooded with cheaper Spanish and cheaper Russian onions, and it has an impact. And so, you know, if we can see that the price of our fruit and veg is related to political discussions, political decisions, then certainly everything else is. And in matter of fact, we're going to see that with the failed, chaotic Brexit shambles that we're going to be faced with the increase in food going up. Our next speaker is Kathy, but I'm not sure whether she's here. We've got Kathy Taylor from Norfolk and Norwich University Hospitals, Unison. And we were hoping that she would be able to talk not just about her experience within the NHS, but looking at how the NHS has been one of those many public sector organisations that have been impacted on by outsourcing things to the private sector. Because while we still might have an NHS, a publicly funded NHS, many of the services within it are the private sector. We'll wait a little while in the hope that Kathy will turn up, but fortunately we've got some questions. So Ben wanted to make a point about schools, and Brian also wanted to talk, and Alison, I don't know if you wanted to make your point publicly rather than in chat, but Ben, if you would like to go, I think you'll be unmuted by...
Yeah, hello. Basically, I go to college, so basically I live it every day. So I go to school and sometimes there'll be people there, and then, you know, next day there'll be people gone. And like my college and like the school that's attached to my college has been quite lucky. We've only had a few cases, but both my parents are also teachers, and they've so throughout the pandemic they've been working, you know, and then during the pandemic, my dad actually got COVID. We're assuming probably from school, because there was a big outbreak at that school. And personally, in my opinion, schools should be open, but there should be greater testing. But this last week before the Christmas period should be shut. And I just want to make a point. The teachers have multiple roles now. Like they're senior leaders. So my parents are senior leaders, and they don't just have to like look after the school. They have to contact trace. They have to, like, if a teacher gets it, they have to go around and then they have to look at all the different seating plans and stuff like that, contact all the different students. And what the government were even saying is a week into that Christmas holiday, they would have to still be working just to contact trace. How is that fair that a public sector who isn't getting a pay rise, even though they've been working throughout the pandemic, and don't get me wrong, the NHS workers have been doing a great job, but I think other workers that have been working throughout the pandemic should get the same recognition. Like, I know they've been working on the front line with all the COVID, but COVID has been going through schools maybe not just as much, but schools have been a breeding place for it. So they've just been put in the exact same danger. So if you're going to make teachers work over like holidays, you can't just say one day, oh, we applaud you, and then next day, oh no, we're gonna boost up the NHS, but we're not going to boost up your pay rise, or we're going to boost you up by a tiny bit and boost up like one group of people by quite a bit. It doesn't make sense to me personally, but I don't know, someone else might have another opinion.
Thank you, Ben. It's really interesting for us when we hear from someone like you that is not only going to school and college, but have parents who are directly impacted as well. And you're absolutely right. The roles that the teachers have to fulfill is not just that of passing over education, knowledge and skills. It is everything in between as well. We know that teachers were tasked with the looking after their students' mental health, with even the Respect campaign. They were meant to look out for students that they thought were being radicalised. They're meant to look out for students that might not have the right to be here, and so much more in between. So to expect them to then do the test and trace and work even longer in the holidays, because we have to remember that teachers might not be in the school environment during the holidays, but they are still working, they're still marking and doing lesson planning. But to expect them to do that with no recognition, just a round of applause for being a key worker on a Thursday, is an absolute travesty. And I'd like you to pass on to your parents solidarity from us all. And it's not just those public sector workers that are providing a key service. Our retail workers also deserve more recognition than they've got, and they are going to be far lower down on the salary bracket. Brian, I believe you've got a few points that you'd like to make.
Yeah, in conjunction with Gawain, we're working on the perspective that come March the 31st, all the COVID support goes. They're going to cut back on benefits. The £20 for universal credit is going to go. So we are having intensive discussions with everybody around the Phoenix Centre in Mile Cross to prepare them for this this period where they're going to lose everything, and to encourage them to fight for it, and under the slogan, if you don't fight for it, you're going to lose it. Gawain, NIH was set up for this particular purpose. We need to start orientating towards the end of this period of support, which is March the 31st. Can you tell me what progress is being made within the schools? Because there are going to be no free school meals during the holidays or any of those things. That's gone. And instead, Johnson will tell us, be grateful you've got a vaccine, you've got a jab. That's me.
Gawain, do you want to take the question from Brian about any progress that the schools have made?
Brilliant. Thanks for unmuting me. Yeah, definitely. I know that the campaign's looking at from January, when we come back after the Christmas break, reaching out, and I believe that reach out in schools is part of the plan to be rolled out from January. As Brian said, the U-turn that we had from the government was only temporary and limited. Not only that, but there are still many families who don't receive free school meal support at all, whether in term time or whether in the holidays. And of course, that was the other aim of the Norfolk Against Holiday Hunger campaign. It's not just extending into the holidays, but also the expansion so that all those families in need of free school meals are able to receive it. So yeah, I believe I'm not on the campaign committee, but I believe the campaign committee is looking at how to roll that out from January. And we know that schools will be a key network. Obviously in the NEU, we'll do everything we can to promote that and to put that out throughout the schools.
Thank you, Gawain. It looks like we still don't have Kathy, who we were calling to speak around the demand number 3 about taxing the wealthy. I'm going to move straight on to Martin once I've made a few points. Tim wants to come in and make a point about home working. So Tim, after we've been through all the speakers, I'm quite happy to bring you in on that, because as somebody who's worked from home for ages, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. So I will make sure that you're brought in to say your piece afterwards. I just wanted to make everyone aware that the East Anglian People Before Profit have weekly organising meetings, and would very much like you to get involved in that, because it is important that, as John has said, we need a real united front, and we do that by having people in their communities involved in organisations like that. If you could also put in the chat what organisation you are a member of, that would be really useful, or along with your contact details, because if we can help support people, if you're an individual who isn't a member of any organisation, we can potentially help you get established in your local community, or recommend a trade union that you should join, or just come along to the People Before Profit weekly meetings so that you are then a member of an organisation, because we know that when we work together, when we link with other communities, other organisations, then we're stronger. John has absolutely made the correct point. We need to unite the employed and unemployed and all union struggles around a common programme. And we saw back in 2011 how powerful the trade unions were when they were all linked and united around the fight to retain their pensions. Once the government saw that, then they started picking off the trade unions one by one. But we did have enormous success when we worked together. And certainly in King's Lynn, we had the largest rally and march that we'd had prior to that, with about 200 people. And if you know anything about King's Lynn, 200 is, the equivalent of 100,000 in London. So, we were pretty pleased. We've now got Martin Booth speaking. Martin is a member, or the founding member, I believe, of Norfolk NHS Action Group and North Norfolk Mental Health Campaign. I've known Martin for a number of years because he used to be the branch secretary of the Unison branch in Addenbrooks. We have campaigned together on numerous things. I haven't seen him for a little while, much like many people, we don't see each other anymore, do we? But I'm really, really pleased to say hello to Martin, and over to you.
Hello. Thank you very much, Joe, and good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. As Joe said, I've been around a while. I've been a health worker since 1976, and within 3 months of starting work, I'd not only joined a union, but I'd become shop steward and organised my first strike. So bit long in the tooth, but still at it. I am, as Joe said, I'm a semi-retired health worker now. I'm a Unison rep at Cromer Hospital. I also secretary of the North Norfolk TUC and chair of the campaign for mental health services in North Norfolk and part of the NHS Norfolk Action Group. Obviously, the NHS has been absolutely out front through the pandemic, and we've got more than used to hearing all the plaudits and applause. Absolutely, has been said, very, very genuine and heartfelt from the ordinary people, but completely hypocritical rubbish from the Tory government. And just to say something about this issue of NHS pay, while Rishi Sunak said that the NHS would be getting a pay rise while everybody else disgracefully is having their pay frozen in the public sector, in reality, the government have not committed themselves to putting 1 penny extra into NHS pay, as Unison has pointed out today. So in fact, Rishi Sunak's promises are not worth the breath they're uttered with. And in fact, we health workers are absolutely in the same boat and in the same fight as everybody else on this question of the pay freeze. And we need to raise that very sharply in our unions to get a lot more active and a lot more militant about it. I think we all know health workers and care workers have paid a terrible cost during the pandemic, with many hundreds of lives lost. And of course, have done a tremendous job, even though I'm not one of those directly dealing with COVID. We know people have put themselves and are putting themselves on the front line all the time. This, of course, is a massive contrast with with the record of the government. And I think it also means that the NHS itself is hugely struggling. You know, many years and years of real terms underfunding in the NHS has led to a situation which was exposed yesterday, where long-term waits in the NHS have gone up by 100 times since the start of the pandemic. That's not a problem because the NHS isn't good enough. It's because of the complete inability of this government and the system they represent to prepare for this pandemic and to make the NHS fit for purpose. But then also we need to look at how the government has handled the pandemic, particularly from the point of view of healthcare and the ideology behind the way that they've approached it. I draw your attention, because I know we're short of time, draw your attention to the Keep Our NHS Public website, where there's a lot of tremendous information. But there's a superb article put up there a couple of weeks ago by Jackie Davis on the subject of track and trace, referring to Channel 4's excellent dispatches programme on the subject, how the government lost control. And they pointed out that after spending £12 billion, we ended up with a system that's not even reaching 50% of contacts. There's been a new report out today showing how badly the system has been working. And of course, the reason is because instead of going to the public sector, the public health organisations, which are already there, they're already in place, ready to go with testing. But instead of that, they went straight to the private sector. They went to Deloitte, the accountancy firm, given millions, and we don't know the exact figures because they won't release them because it's all the confidential under the COVID emergency rules, given millions to create and run test and trace, immediately outsourced it. And they went to one of the biggest companies involved, is a firm called Randox. They process about 1/5 of tests from care homes. An NHS microbiologist in Randox said it's hard not to be speechless, would be shut down if we performed as badly as they've been doing. The turnaround time could be up to 7 days, which is completely useless. There's also a VIP system was put in place whereby firms who paid extra could have tests put through. Randox denied that, but of course the evidence is there. But then this is where it is worth looking at what's going on, because you look at the connections between Randox and some other key players in track and trace. So we got Matt Hancock. We all know Matt Hancock, local MP for West Suffolk, Secretary of State for Health, and amongst the places that he's the MP for is Newmarket, and he receives funding from the racing industry. Now, who was put in charge of Test and Trace for no apparent reason was Baroness Dido Harding, who happens to be a key board member of the Jockey Club. Anybody knows anything about Newmarket knows how important they are. They own Newmarket. Now, one of the biggest events of that the Jockey Club organises is the Grand National, not at Newmarket as we know, but guess who sponsors the Grand National? Randox. This is the connections that we have. Randox were paid 133 million to start off with to provide testing, followed by another 350 million. They got Owen Patterson, top Tory on their board for 100,000 a year as a consultant. Now, you might be concerned about this and you might want to go to the government and say, look, there's potential corruption here. So in which case you can complain to the government's anti-corruption champion. Their anti-corruption champion is an MP by the name of John Penrose, who happens to be married to who? Dido Harding. This is the way it works. This is the way they set things up. Then you've got Serco. We've all heard about Serco, £410 million contract. They subcontract the work to smaller companies, but have refused to name them. We know that recently it was said that if companies with connections to the government, to ministers, are 10 times more likely to get contracts than those who haven't. And I think today it was revealed that out of £17 billion of contracts that have been handed out, 10 billion have gone to companies that didn't go through any kind of tendering process, any kind of legal process at all because of the emergency COVID regulations. So Serco had a £25 million boost to their profits thanks to the pandemic and a boost in their share price. And as a matter of interest, the health minister, MP Edward Argar, is a former head of Serco Public Affairs. So this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with, while we are paying with our lives, with our livelihoods, we are being forced to pay. These people are doing very well out of this pandemic. And that needs to be got across loud and clear, because I'm not sure that many people are that aware of this absolutely outrageous and scandalous situation. But I think it also should make us think about how we can fight, because I mean, we've already heard some very inspirational speeches and things tonight, particularly about the trade unions and the struggle of workers. In North Norfolk, it's a rural area, small towns, small seaside towns, quite a lot of problems actually, very underfunding of public services, particularly health services, and especially mental health services. And I've been very pleased to be involved over the last year or two with our local mental health campaign, which was set up 2 years ago. Because frankly, in North Norfolk, we've got no mental health services. And I mean, it's an area which has got a Tory MP and a Lib Dem council. But just before the lockdown, we had a couple of really packed meetings on the question of mental health, and collect thousands of signatures on petitions to demand proper mental health services. And although during the pandemic, it's obviously been difficult, we've tried to find ways and means to mobilize whatever opinion we can to put pressure on to get the services that we need through, and latest one being a questionnaire that we're sending out through the through local media and whatever means we can, to get people to speak up about the state of mental health services. And it's slow progress, but we are getting, I mean, there's not a week goes by where we're not, in the faces of the local MP and local and health organisations making our demands for a walk-in centre and all the other things that we're doing. And I think, I know I'm speaking here to people who are also involved in many similar campaigns around the region. But I think what I'm trying to say is that it's inevitable that the interests of the government and the people that they represent are coming into conflict with the real interests of ordinary people here in our region, working people, even though many of those people might have all sorts of views about all sorts of topics. Many of them might even have voted Conservative in the last general election, maybe conned by Brexit or whatever, but their interests are in complete collision with the interests of the government. And I think that that's where we need to, start out and have some confidence that people who in our areas will listen to us when we speak out and we are prepared to organise to defend our public services and to fight for public services and to fight for our interests. I don't think we should at all take a view, which I've heard sometimes, to say, oh, for goodness sake, you know, the Tories have got an 80-seat majority, what can we do? And all this kind of thing. I think they've got a soft underbelly here. And I think, you know, here in this region, we've got an opportunity to really get into that soft underbelly, to say, no, ordinary people here demand proper health services. We demand an end to these services being hived off to the private sector. We know there's going to be far more of that in 2021. That'll be part of their programme for the coming year, alongside attacking workers' rights and so on. And I think that we need to look at any means necessary to get organised, to get amongst people and to organise them. Everything from petitions and writing letters through to, you know, organising strikes and occupying buildings. And I've done all of them. And I know quite a few of you have done the same as well. So I think we need to have some confidence going forward. I think this is a great initiative, People Before Profit. And I hope that from here tonight, we can really build a network across the region, you know, to take the Tories on in 2021, because we absolutely must and we absolutely can.
Martin, thank you so much. That was really inspiring, and we do indeed, you know, need to take back control, take the language that the Conservatives used when they were wanting us to vote to leave the European Union. We need to do it. We need to take back that control. And you're absolutely right. People just seem to think that because the Conservatives have got such a large majority, there's nothing that we can do about it. But I have always said I will not roll over and allow them to get away with what they're doing without fighting against it. And we need to have confidence to know the impact that our fights locally can have. So never be afraid, never be afraid to take to the streets. While I might be a hardened activist, I'm also a very proud grandma. And I think it's a sad state that I've spent years, as have many of you, fighting for equal pay for women and for my daughters. And now I'm going to have to do the same thing for my granddaughter. Brian has said that the only effective track and trace is the networking by the elite, where they target each other for financial gain. And he's absolutely right. They organise far better than we do. They know how to make those connections. And they have the confidence because they have that sense of entitlement and to believe that they can pull it off without any questions. And we need to start taking back that narrative. We need to have that confidence. Without us working, they won't have the profits that they want. I need to apologise. Hugh wanted to come in response to some of the issues around schools. So before I open the question up for those that want to address what Martin said, I'm just going to go back to Hugh. So apologies, Hugh. It shows that I'm unable to multitask in the way that I thought I could. Can Hugh be unmuted, please? Sorry. I can't hear you, but I don't know. Can you hear you?
No, I think you'll have to leave the meeting and come back. I think you've had this problem before with your mic, haven't you? You're unmuted as far as we're concerned, but we can't hear you.
Okay. Catherine Holland is now leaving, so bye Catherine, and thank you very much for coming. Could I remind you please that we are keen to get your contact details and the organisations that you're a part of. It's only through us connecting outside these meetings and that we can have any hope in continuing the organisation that we need to do to do as Martin said, which is, you know, kick the soft underbelly of the Tories. And that's absolutely what we must do. Gawain is leaving, but I'd like to thank him again for giving up some time on a Friday evening from his campaign, which I know he's getting stuck into. And if any of you wanted to support that campaign, then just Google Gawain Little and the details will come up. One of the other demands from the People Before Profit is an immediate immediate investment in the green infrastructure and the repurposing of industries, ending our dependency on fossil fuels and providing 1 million climate jobs. And also linked to that, a huge investment in council housing and public transport, that much vital public transport that Jane mentioned at the start, that many people who live in rural communities are reliant on. And I'm really pleased that we've got Jamie Osborn speaking next, who's a Green Party member and a Norwich City Councillor. So hopefully Jamie will be able to put some potential flesh on the meat of this demand for us. Thank you, Jamie. I can't hear Jamie again. Jamie looks like he's still muted.
Thank you. Yes, I think I was unmuted and I muted myself again, then couldn't unmute again. Thank you, Joe, and to all the other speakers who've already spoken. I want to just take a moment to sort of look ahead and imagine what a Norwich would be like in, I'm based in Norwich, but this could equally be anywhere, in a few years' time, where everyone has access to a secure and a warm home, where no one is hungry because everyone has well-paid and meaningful work for all those who want it. And those who aren't in employment or who want a change in career have access to training, and they have access to education within their communities as well as in more formal settings. Everything that's needed is on a daily basis, that schools, your work, your local shops, is no more than 15 minutes walk away from your home. And there's decent and affordable public transport and clean public transport if you want to go further afield. Everyone will have access to green spaces, to recreation or for growing food. Children can play in the streets, and this will be, in Norwich, it could be a dynamic city with lots of local businesses running on clean energy, and local people, especially those who have been historically most vulnerable and most excluded, would have a direct say in the governance of their community. Now, all of that sounds quite far-fetched when you look at the situation that we're in right now, as has been described by many of the speakers already. And, you know, a lot of people have highlighted the impact of the pandemic, but as Gawain was saying, this is not just a short-term effect of the pandemic. It's really a long-term effect of the neoliberal system and the 10 years of austerity that we've had. And here in Norwich, we've had a 350% increase in homelessness in the last decade. Over the next 15 to 16 years, more than 1 in 3 households will be in need of affordable housing. The number of people claiming universal credit in Norwich has soared, and as have food bank referrals to well over 7,000. Young people like myself and people like Ben who spoke earlier are facing little in the way of job options, and more than half of under 25s in the region say that they have only average or poor job prospects. Meanwhile, the Black Lives Matter protests have obviously highlighted this year the atrocious and the really persistent and ongoing ways in which people whose ancestors were enslaved or colonized are still suffering and are still undermined. And throughout all of this, there's been a pursuit of economic growth, which is meant to be, you know, float all the boats, everyone will get better. That clearly hasn't worked. And at the same time, it's also driven catastrophic damage to our environment. 40% of vertebrate species and 1 in 5 plant species in Britain are threatened with extinction. And the accelerating climate crisis could cause dire food shortages. We're already seeing rises in the price of wheat as a result of droughts earlier this year. And flooding as well, of course, which is especially likely to affect Norfolk, and large parts of Norwich even could be underwater. And as I said earlier, many of these inequalities and these problems have been exacerbated by the pandemic, but they're not new. What could be new is the way that we respond to them. The pandemic has brought about a lot of inequality and greater profits for the super rich, which is really just obscene, but it's also brought about a lot more demand for positive change, including this group, the People Before Profit group and lots of the mutual aid networks and food banks and people working together to try and counter this system from the bottom up. And so there was an inquiry done by some of the more progressive members of parliament on resetting the UK and what people actually want after the pandemic. And they found that people want a fairer, kinder, greener and more connected Britain. And so we need to be looking at, when we're building back better from this situation, how do we achieve that? And a couple of weeks ago, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I proposed a motion to Norwich City Council on a just transition, which I think was sent. I think Wendy might have sent it round to the People Before Profit mailing list for people who were on the mailing list at that time. So some of you will have seen it, and I'm happy to share it again afterwards. But really, what that is it's looking at how can we address the climate crisis and create jobs at the same time, and use that as an opportunity to build back better for a fairer society for everyone. And this is not just about, there's sort of two strands to this. There's creating jobs in the green economy, so in retrofitting homes, so that people, we need to retrofit homes on a massive scale. Something like 1.25 million homes need solar panels in the east of England region. Something like 1.4 million need heat pump retrofits. And that's got one of the biggest sources of job creation locally. We can also be localizing food production so that there's less reliance on these sort of just-in-time imported food networks, which are actually extremely vulnerable, as we saw earlier on in the pandemic. And that would mean that people can have access to healthier and more local food. And there's lots of jobs in these sectors, but it's also about looking at what do people want from their society and giving people power directly to shape that vision for a better society. So one of the key parts of my motion was actually saying, as I think it was Martin was highlighting, the ways that the networks of power from those who are already rich and already have are in positions of influence can have their own networks and bring about the changes that they want to see. Actually, what we need to do is democratize the economy. And so one of the things that I proposed in my motion was having, first of all, greater trade union representation on the boards of powerful bodies like the Local Enterprise Partnership, which, if you haven't heard of them, have millions of pounds of public money on, and they set on the local economic strategy, the local transport strategy, the local energy strategy, and also proposing citizens' assemblies so that people, which is a form of participatory democracy where people can speak and deliberate amongst themselves, and it's demographically representative so that everyone has a say. I'm going to wrap up there because I know that we're short for time, but I was just going to say that I'm really keen to use this motion that was passed by the City Council as a lever to engage other campaigns. So I know that Norwich District Trains Council has now set up or is going to set up a environmental subcommittee, and I'd be keen to talk to any other groups who would want to build sort of momentum to a Green New Deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. We're getting really short of time, so I'm going to wait to take any questions, and Hugh will be the first person I come back to once we've heard from our other two speakers. Tim, I hope that we'll have time to hear from you before we go. Our next speaker is Dr. Jim Graham from Norwich Extinction Rebellion, and I think it's quite apt that we hear from Extinction Rebellion, particularly as Jamie has said, what they want to do is give people power to shape their community, and I feel very strongly that Extinction Rebellion have helped us do that. And there have been a number of bad reports about the action that they've taken, but we know we have to start with direct action, because all too often the powers will ignore reasoned debate. And so I'm not adverse to action being taken. I'm really pleased that we've got Dr. Graham here to speak with us tonight. Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, I will try to keep this to time. So, I'm here as a representative of Norwich XR at the moment, hence the planet. But I work at UEA. I'm a researcher. My role is based in the kind of point where people and technology and politics have come together, which makes it horribly complicated more than anything else. One of the things, and this is going to sound like an odd thing to say, one of the things I really like about climate change is it makes politics incredibly simple. It's physics. It's, does it get hotter or does it not? That kind of thing. I recently did some work with the City Council and the university with the Good Economy Commission. And one of the big questions they asked, obviously, is what is a good economy? What is it for? What is the point of it if it's not delivering for what is quite an impoverished city, sort of, in its own ways? And the thing that kept coming up in conversation, in particular kept coming up in conversation with me, was resilience. You have to have a resilient economy, and next year is probably going to be a case study in how resilient our local, national, possibly international economy actually is. But more to the point, if it's not, for me at least, if it's not taking climate into account, it's not worth anything. Like one of the things that just boiled my brain, I've done some work with construction companies, and one of the things that really I found very, very odd is they're talking, in some cases, they're talking about building things with 60-year lifespans and not factoring in the kind of climate impacts, but not just the impacts of those buildings, but what the world's going to look like at the end of that 60-year lifespan, possibly because they don't care. That's reasonable. If you're just building a thing, you don't necessarily have to. But there are timescales here that really matter. It's easy to say, we have to do everything we can right now. We have to mitigate as much as possible. We have to adapt as much as possible. That's fair. But one of the things that Extinction Rebellion exists to do is explain to people that there's going to be damage now. It's not just a case of like 20 years ago, 40 years ago, if we got on top of this when the UNFCCC started and sustainable development became a thing people talked about, if we'd really got on board with it then, we'd probably have just sailed through what is now a crisis without it being much of a blip. And we'd have clean cities and people cycling and redesign stuff and all sorts of things, and it would be wonderful. I'm kind of glad to Jamie for taking out most of the stuff I had about co-benefits, because I don't really need to tell people about that anymore, which is good. But yeah, on the subject of lead times, one of the things obviously that Norwich, or the east of England, talks about a lot is sea level rise. And it's one of my favorite kind of horses to beat, because people don't talk about sea level rise in a sort of, what I would consider to be a sensible way. The thing we need to remember about sea level rise is it's very, very slow. So it sounds very dramatic, like the waves are coming for us, but they're not, or they are. Like flooding is going to be a massive problem, but it's very much more kind of rivers and unseasonal weather and more extreme weather causing rivers to burst their banks and flood inside. The sea is going to come get us when we've all starved because the crops failed because it rained too much on them. That's the kind of time scale that we're looking at. By the same token, you're looking at, if anyone's seen some of the more recent sea level rise maps, when I'm talking about buildings with 60-year lifespans, if you're building something in Great Yarmouth right now, it might be underwater by the time its operational lifespan is done. We have to start talking about planning for that moment when people aren't going to be able to live in places where they currently do. I mean, we can talk about coastal erosion and all that kind of stuff, but there's not that many people that live like right on the coast. But Great Yarmouth, King's Lynn, most of the Wash is going to go. Like, it sounds like a hyperbolic thing to say, but it's true. It's just a matter of time, which means we need to start planning immediately as to where those people are going to live, or where, more accurately, probably where their children are going to live, and what they're going to do when an entire town's worth of housing suddenly becomes valueless as soon as somebody realizes, no, wait, we can't insure that anymore because it's not going to be there, or it's not going to be a home, a dwelling, sometime in the foreseeable future. Yeah, so there are real problems. Obviously, I'm not saying we shouldn't start now. We shouldn't start talking about this. But the complications of exactly when all of these things are going to happen is something we need to talk about. One thing I will finish with as quickly as I can is I just recently sat in on a workshop the Climate Change Committee, the government's climate change body, did about their new carbon budget. One of the things I found really galling about it was they were talking about a just transition. Now, I'm quite glad that I got to say this and no one else seemed to have mentioned it today. Not that you're not talking about it, but not actually use those words. But it was slightly galling that XR has spent the last year or so arguing about whether or not we should have a fourth demand, which involves a just transition, because if it's not fair, it's not going to work. It's a practical thing rather than a moral thing. But it's slightly galling to know that the British government might actually beat us to that declaration. Anyway, on that positive note, I shall finish because I'm now 30 seconds over.
Thank you very much. And it always sort of, as he said, it's galling when they pick up on something that you've been banging on about for a long time. Believe it or not, in Kings Lynn, our borough council wouldn't declare a climate change emergency, despite the fact that half our area is by the coast, and and we're situated in the fens, so we're going to get it both ways, aren't we? We're going to have our rivers rising and flooding us, and the sea defences unable to stop the sea. So a few people are going, thank you very much, but I'm really pleased that we've got to finalise, to finish off this evening, Ellen Clifford. Ellen is coming in on the final demand about a welfare system that provides real social security and dignity. And we're looking at universal credit and the bedroom tax both being scrapped. They're punitive, they discriminate against people with disabilities and who are the most in need. And they are most definitely making people with disabilities pay a price for something that they had absolutely no control over and did not cause. And the final demand also says that there should be a moratorium on housing evictions, so that we're not going to see more people end up on the streets, bearing in mind that we've got night shelters here, and not just me, but many people volunteer to help our homeless. So Ellen, thank you for rounding everybody up, and I appreciate you coming in at the back. Hopefully we will get to hear from a few people after you, especially if I shut up now.
Thanks very much, Joe. I'm here speaking tonight because Mark Harrison from Norfolk Against Universal Credit isn't able to be with us for personal reasons, but I'm really delighted to be here this evening speaking to you during Disability History Month. And after such a terrible, grief-filled year, I've been really touched by the level of solidarity that's been shown to Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC, which I'm a member of, by our wider allies during this year's DHM. I was originally asked to talk a bit about my book, so I was going to read a couple of short paragraphs, but I don't think I will because I realise we're short of time. But yeah, my book, The War on Disabled People, Capitalism, Welfare and the Making of a Human Catastrophe, came out this year, and that covers the impact of welfare reform and austerity measures on deaf and disabled people, and it covers the period 2010 to 2020. Obviously, during that period, we saw a mass regression of deaf and disabled people's rights due to a deliberate and systematic agenda, an ideological agenda waged by the government. But if we thought that was bad as disabled people, we've then had the pandemic and COVID-19, and many of the themes that the book pulls out have actually been much more starkly exposed, I suppose, by the pandemic. So a minimum of 60% of deaths, COVID-related deaths, have been of disabled people. And yet the mainstream narrative has presented our deaths as somehow inevitable, and at the same time expendable, disabled and older people. Our lives have been looked at as kind of in terms of weighing up whether keeping more of us alive or getting the economy going is the more important question. And in kind of devaluing our deaths in that way, it also devalues the lives of disabled people, as if that hadn't been a big enough problem to begin with. And research by Scope has recently shown that 1 in 5 disabled workers have been refused work requests for safer working conditions. And then At the same time, we've seen certain welfare reform measures that disabled people and benefit claimants have been fighting for years, just suddenly suspended overnight when millions more working people came onto the universal credit scheme from March onwards, such as the temporary suspension of conditions, conditionality and sanctions, and then of course the uprating of universal credit by £20 a week, which I know Brian spoke about earlier. And so that's a demand I'd say we all need to get behind in order to keep and make permanent that uprating of £20 a week, but also to apply it to legacy benefits, which disabled people tend more to still be on. In writing the book, I wanted to make sure that what's been quite a pivotal moment in disabled people's history, the moment when things started going dramatically backwards for disabled people. I wanted to make sure that moment in history was recorded from the perspective of disabled people ourselves. It's still quite widely considered acceptable for non-disabled people to talk about us without us or any reference to what we actually think, to tell us what to do, and even to tell us what we ought to think. The lived experience of disabled people really does sharply expose both I'd say the limitations and also the particular brutality of a system that puts profit before people. And when disabled people's stories are retold without us, they too often become depoliticized. And I could see that already happening before I wrote the book. So, for example, the United Nations Disability Committee carried out an unprecedented special investigation into UK government's treatment of disabled people and made that finding that the UK government was responsible for grave and systematic violations of disabled people's rights due to austerity and welfare reform. And I've attended a few academic seminars on that special investigation that completely left out the fact that it was grassroots campaigners that had provided robust evidence to the committee that triggered the investigation from happening in the first place. It wasn't something that automatically happened. A lot of hard work went into getting that to happen. And one of the problems with that, I think, is that it kind of can give the illusion to disabled people that there are these bodies out here that will just kind of step in from above and intervene from their lofty positions to help us out when we're the victims of social injustice. And that's not really how the world works. Disabled people, it's important that we find our own agents that grassroots resilience a fundamentally different system, one where claimants are treated with dignity and respect, where benefits are paid at rates that guarantee a decent standard of living. I'm involved as co-chair of something called the Commission on Social Security, taking a benefit claimant's perspective and developing proposals for what such a system could look like. But the likelihood of those proposals just being picked up by government are fairly slim. And what we need for that is, a strong and united resistance that is demanding no less. Initiatives that bring our struggles together and are willing to take serious action, such as strikes and workplace occupations and direct actions that people today have been talking about. That's what we need, bringing our struggles together, and we need to do that now more than ever. So just congratulations to everyone involved in organising tonight, and if you're not involved, then do join. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen, I'm really sorry that we don't have enough time for questions, and I would like to suggest that we have a longer meeting specifically to look at the issues that you've raised, because we know you've presented us with some really harsh statistics there, and behind every statistic, as the government likes to remind us, but without the genuine meaning that we have. There is a human being. We know too many human beings that have been hit by this government and are now being hit by COVID, and it's something that we need to address in more depth. I really would like to put a final call out for you to leave your contact details, please, and sign up and get involved in People Before Profit. And attend our weekly organising meetings and consider taking action in your community. And we have a very few minutes left, but I really would like to go to Hugh. And then I'm going to ask if we've got enough time, if Tim can set out what he was saying. And Krzysztof, if we have enough time, perhaps you next. But Hugh, please.
Okay, can you hear me now? That's brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to speak just generally very quickly. I think there's obviously a huge crisis going on, in multiple crisis of the environment. That's obviously been going on a long time, but we've also seen the solution for it in the last few months. The solution for it is the potent forces of trade unions in the workplace and protests on the street, and we have to combine that. On September the 20th, 7 million school children and workers went out for the environment, and that is absolutely the solution for progress. Black Lives Matter seem to come out of nowhere. Black people are being shot all the time in America, and we've seen attacks in this country. All of a sudden, a spark, and more progress was made in raising the issues of racism and police brutality in weeks than elections and parliaments have done in decades. So we've seen the solution. There's two big opportunities to get out. I think we're entering an era of mass protest, and we've got to get the unions involved, because our power lies in unions and mass protest together on the streets. We don't wait for elections. We don't care what majority Boris Johnson's got. He's a very, very weak Prime Minister. Look what a hash he's made of everything he touches. And we've got to make that stick. So this weekend, there's XR's 12th Day of Christmas starting tomorrow, 12 o'clock in Chapel Field, drumming. Get out there if you can. I know that's in Norwich. There'll be other things all over the place. On Sunday, there's a Polish women's protest. That is taken off out of nowhere. Horrific government in Poland wanting to ban abortion. You've seen hundreds of thousands of people on the street. That is the solution. And that will happen in this country, but we have to build for it now. We can't just wait for it to happen. We have to get into our unions, talk about the environment, talk about COVID, and combine those potent forces, and we can defeat them.
Thank you, Hugh. I totally agree, but all too often we see people that are afraid to take action on the streets, are afraid to be seen as being part of an organisation, because they're afraid of trouble. And we have to stand up, people like you and I, people who are attending this meeting, and give them the confidence and support them. And sometimes the best way that you can give people confidence is by supporting their strikes in their workplaces as trades councils, turning up with your banner and showing solidarity so that they know that they're not alone, because this government would have people like us believe that we are alone and the majority do not agree, and we know that that's not true. Tim, we've got basically a minute, really. If you could just talk about working from home, because I believe that it is a significant issue. It costs people, and it also alienates those who can work and those who can't work from home. So if you've got a quick, ever so quick, please.
Yep, I'll be as quick as possible. Yep, my name's Tim Knight Hughes. I'm a member of Unite. I work for Reassure, work in the finance industry. I think millions of people work from home, or have been working from home during the crisis, and that's changed the nature of employment fundamentally. And I think part of People Before Profit has to incorporate that. One of the big things is surveillance. Employers are investing millions, billions of pounds in surveillance technology to survey what you do at home. And I'm talking about technology that will monitor where your mouse goes, where you click, what you say, how you say it, if you go on the website, how long you go to the toilet, and so on and so forth. employers are using the lockdown as a chance to really go on the offensive against working people. And there are millions of people who have worked from home, who work in areas such as finance. In Unite, they're producing a home working agreement, which we're trying to argue for in my workplace, which is the right to disconnect. That's a big argument. So some employers are saying that you do not have the right to disconnect if you're working from home. Big question about who pays for the cost of computers, technology, broadband, heating to work from home, and electricity. And lots of employers are trying to force the cost onto those who are working from home, saying you're saving a lot of time and money. You don't need those costs, which is a lot of nonsense. And the other speakers tonight talking about pay being in the private sector. If the public sector has a pay freeze, that will come over to the private sector. They will use that as an excuse. And in places like finance, like where I work, insurance, people aren't paid that well at all. It's a common misunderstanding that people who work in like Barclays or whatever paid a lot of money, but often they're not. Another big issue, I think, will be maybe job losses coming up, and automation. Companies are using our voices working from home to allow AI to learn how to mimic human voices to replace our jobs without our consent or even our knowledge. That's a huge issue that Unite wants to take up. And there's obviously mental health issues. So the Unite is where I work is arguing, and I think that should be incorporated in People Before Profit, that people should have a right to work from home if they want to, or have the flexibility.
I am sorry. I just want to bring it. I'm really sorry, because again, I think it's a really important subject, but you know, we just don't have the time to go into it in depth. I'm going to bring in Krzysztof as the final person to ask a question, and then we will have to round up and call it a night. So thank you, Krzysztof.
Yes, thank you for giving me a voice. I was about to ask Jamie Osborn about green energy, if this will meet the demand of the country in the future without, for example, nuclear power plants and gas power plants. But I think we don't have time, and this is it's like silly questions to the other to other things which have been touched. So I don't expect to answer today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. Sorry, thank you, Krzysztof. Thank you very much for understanding. And I'm sorry, you know, as very often happens on these sorts of events, we overrun it. And it's because we've got such a good range of speakers who have got such important things to say to us, and some really good questions. Thank you so much for taking part in this first rally and launch that we've had for East Anglian People Before Profit. If you haven't already, please leave your contact details and the name of your organisation in the chat. We believe that People Before Profit can do some vitally important work within our community, and we can do it if we all organise and work together, regardless of what our organisation is. It is us and our neighbours and our friends that make the difference. It is us that are doing the work that earns the shareholders the profit, and it is us who must take back control and start directing and shaping the narrative going forward. We cannot rely on the Conservatives one little bit, and there are also some other you know, political groups that we have to start organising and shaping a little bit better. So thank you so much to everybody. Thank you for our amazing speakers, and I will say good night to you all. If you can take part in the events taking place over the weekend, please do. And if you have the idea for any form of action in your community, please get in touch, and we will, if we can, support you however we can. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Solidarity.